Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Coleman, and I'll be the moderator for this session titled Safety and Reliability of AI in the Workplace. Before we begin, we have a few reminders. We have a code of conduct that we will adhere to for this conference, and I'll post the link in chat in a moment. If you experience any issues related to conduct, please contact us via email, and I also am putting that in the chat as well. So here that information is. Please be sure your microphone is muted. Actually, I think you're all muted automatically. And during the Q&A, please wait until you're invited to unmute. I don't know if you have the ability to unmute yourselves, so that might be moot. You can also use chat for questions and the Q&A feature as well. This session is being recorded. You can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. And I'll say that Zach has requested that we hold questions toward the end. Unless you have something extremely urgent, you can go ahead and put them in and queue them up in chat or in Q&A, and I'll be monitoring those. So if something seems like really urgent, I'll interrupt Zach and he can address that then. It is my pleasure to introduce Zach McElveen. Zach is a library associate at, I'm going to mispronounce this, Dacula, is that right? Dacula branch of
Yeah.
Tequila branch of the Gwinnett County Library System. He has a bachelor's degree in history from Reinhardt College and a master's degree in early childhood special education from Brunel University. Please join me in welcoming Zachariah. And Zachariah, or Zach, go ahead and take it away.
Hey everybody, I hope you're all having a good day. So thank you, Jason, for the introduction and for being my moderator today. I really appreciate it. And today we are going to be talking about safety in AI. And I broke it down into two sections. And the first one is about workplace safety and about how we use it as an organization. And then part two is going to be more about social responsibility. So I'm Zach. I am a library associate at Gwinnett County, and I've been doing a lot of research into AI, and I've been using it lately. And that kind of kickstarted my interest in the subject of how to use it safely. So, sort of jumping right off, the good, the bad, and the ugly of using AI. So AI can eliminate waste and improve the quality of our work. It's really good at making our work go faster, eliminating unnecessary downtime, increasing productivity, and brainstorming. However, we have to keep in mind that it is a tool, and it is a tool that is influenced by bias. So we want to make sure when we're using it in a way that's responsible. And we need to be aware that the data that we share with AI may not be private. So this can be a potential security risk for your organization and for our patrons if we're not careful with that. So we're going to be talking a lot about data, about collecting data, about being used to train AI. So before we get started, the question is, what is data? And data includes social media posts, videos, drawings, paintings, writing, audio, and literature. So a lot of these applications will be taking things that you post and be using it to train AI or to collect data. Applications like Alexa will begin gathering data from your voice and from the conversations you're having, and it's going to start using this to train AI, and it might be sold. So generative AI can use the data that's given to it to generate visual art, writing, music, edit photos, mimic voices, and more. So when we're talking about data, just bear in mind that this is what it's being used for. So the next question becomes data security. How do we protect our organization's data and the data of our patrons? So when you put a question or a prompt into an AI, it's not something that's going to be immediately visible to other people who use it. However, it is going to be available to the company that is gathering that information to train the AI. And if it's used to train the AI, then that data can then be sort of used to generate content and can even be um, given made available to the public. So even if the information you enter into an LLM or a large language model, something like ChatGPT, for instance, even if it's not available to other users, the company that owns it will then have access to that data and they can choose to release it. They can choose to sell it to other companies or organizations. And even if they don't choose to do that, if they get hacked or information gets leaked, then the hackers would have access to that data that they have. So even if a company has a good privacy policy, you think that you trust them, they could always end up changing their policy later. They could be purchased by another company who would then change the policy that they use in terms of how they use your data. So when you're making decisions about AI, you want to look at what the policies are now, but you also want to be looking into the future about how things could change, about how it could be used down the road. So, what cannot be safely shared with AI? You should not give an AI model access to any private information, any information related to your patrons, any information related to your organization or yourself. Anything you would not want to be made public should not be shared with an AI model. Anything that is posted to the public online can be gathered and used by AI. So even if you're not sharing it with an AI, let's say you just post public information, that can be gathered and used for AI. So a good rule of thumb is don't share anything online that you don't want to be used in an AI model or given to other organizations. So what can be safely shared with AI? So any information that is okay to be shared with and used by the public can be shared with AI. This includes it can be shared with individuals, companies, institutions, and with governments. So I use AI. I use ChatGPT, and as an example, I'll go on there and I'll say, "Give me 20 program ideas to help children learn their ABCs." There's no private information on there. I'm not sharing patrons' data or anything to do with the organization. The only thing ChatGPT is going to get from that is that I'm teaching children how to do their ABCs, learning to read, and I'm using it to kind of quickly get past that brainstorming session and get some ideas as a jumping off point. It saves me time. It makes my job a little bit easier, but I'm very careful about what I'm actually telling these AI models. So, what are some relatively safe AI options? So, when most people think of an AI model, they're going to be thinking about cloud provided LLMs, something like ChatGPT that's going to be on the internet. If you choose to use something like ChatGPT, then do your research and your due diligence about what information and data they're gathering and how they're using it, and only provide data that you're comfortable sharing. Don't give them anything that you don't want them to have access to, and you want to make sure that you consider them a trustworthy source. Another option is called a private LLM. Private LLMs give you a version of a model that you can use within your organization. And this is going to give you control over how that language model or AI behaves. And every input that you put into it and that comes out of it is going to remain within your organization. So this is an excellent choice for a company or any organization that wants to keep a tight lid on their private information. A lot of times it might be a little bit more expensive, but depending on the size of your organization, how you want to use AI, this can be a good option. So, and we're starting to see more and more of these. Sometimes some of the more famous LLMs will have a private version that you can pay to use. And then there are LLMs that are 100% private that you can utilize within your company. And then AI tools. So even if we're not talking about these language models like ChatGPT, you're going to see a lot of tools that we use start to incorporate AI. So one example that I've used is Adobe. We use Adobe where I work, and they have started incorporating AI tools into their visual products. And the way they do it is they train that AI on images that they own. It's all it's all from a library of images that they've paid for that they own, and they're using that to train it. So they're not gathering data from other sources to train their AI. It's all within the house. And so when you're using tools that use AI, you can make sure that they're doing this sort of ethical training model where they're using information that they pay for and that people are aware of that they're using it. They're not gathering it from other sources. So, what are some of the legal ramifications of misusing AI, even by accident? So, lawsuits can be filed against AI companies or individuals for copyright infringement, for violating database rights, or for breach of confidence. So, as an example, if I were to use an AI to make art of Mickey Mouse and start selling it, Disney can sue me for that. If Disney found out that an AI company was using their trademarks to train their AI, they could be sued for that. And potentially, if I give information to an AI and that gets breached, and let's say our patrons' data gets released into the public, then that can, I mean, we can be liable for that. And it also, we have to keep in mind, is going to hurt our brand, is going to hurt public trust in our institutions. So we need to be very careful about how we use our data, where we place it, and to what degree it's secure. So part of that's going to be knowing where an AI gets its data. If you use an AI tool, where is it gathering that information to train that AI? If a third party sold data sets that contained copyrighted material, then you or the company could be liable. And then something that was interesting to me, at least 40% of generative AI prompts requested an AI to mimic an artist. And this was for visuals. So as an example, I could go in there and give me a cartoon cat that's in the style of Walt Disney. That would be an example. And so we're talking about these copyright issues. Almost half of the prompts are already requesting the AI to generate images based on copyrighted material and on other people's style of writing and of visual art. So this is something we have to be aware of. So another one is legal issues can wipe out workplace gains. We've talked about saving time, potentially saving money, being more efficient because of AI. However, if there's a lawsuit or there's an issue of public trust, that can wipe out whatever gains we gain from using AI in the first place. AI issues can eliminate the public's trust in your institutions. So, as an example, Air Canada used an AI chatbot for customer service. And the chatbot, when it was talking to a customer, made up a policy that did not exist. And so when that customer tried to go to them for that policy and they said that's on our policy, there was a lawsuit, and the judge forced the company to abide by the policy that the chat bot made up. So even though that wasn't their real policy, even though it was something that was created by the AI, because they used it and because they used it for customer service, they were required to honor what that AI said. So if you are not the customer, you're the product, and sometimes you're both. So apps owned by Meta, X, which was formerly Twitter, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and others will gather data from their users. If you're not paying for a service, then you need to think about how they're making money, because if they're not selling you something, then they're probably making money off of your information. And a lot of companies that are charging you are still going to be gathering your information and selling it. So even if you're paying for something, you may not be safe, and you need to do the research to make sure that you're not sharing any private data. So another thing to consider is that it's not just AI and companies that are gathering up data. It can be sent to advertisers, and it can be sent to governments. It can be collected by the NSA or even by other institutions in other countries. So, as an example, the NSA has rules and regulations about what they're allowed to gather from citizens, but there's no reason they cannot purchase your information if it's available on the internet. And so, governments around the world are able to get past legal barriers on surveillance by simply purchasing your data. If you're giving away your information willingly for free on the internet, then they can buy that. And so you're not just sharing your information with one company, you're potentially making it available to everybody. So what if we say, well, I don't like AI. This seems like it's more trouble than it's worth. I don't really want to interact with it. That's not really an option, unfortunately, because even if you're not using AI tools, your data is still being collected from other sources. So some of the material that's being gathered by large companies is being gathered illegally, and it includes copyrighted material. So as an example, there's a data set called Book 3 that contained copyrighted books, and it was used to train AI models. It had work from George R. R. Martin, Stephen King, Margaret Atwood, Zadie Smith, and many other sources that were owned and copyrighted by those authors and by publishers, but it was still in this data set that was being used to train AI. And there was a major lawsuit over that. So AI can take material in a way that is breaking the law, and some of these massive companies are the ones that are currently doing it. And part of the reason is because the law has not fully defined what companies can and cannot do with AI. So they're kind of testing the boundaries, and we're kind of finding out through the court system what is and is not allowed. So when you're using the internet, even if you don't interact with AI, your information can still be used by it. Another place companies will gather data from is from open data set that's provided by the government, research institutions, companies, nonprofits, and individuals. There's a lot of data that's just available for anyone to look at and see. And if it's free, then it's probably going to be gathered by these companies. A lot of it is automated. They'll have something called data scrapers that will go through, find data, download it, and add it to the AI for training purposes. So it's not even necessarily people that are doing it. A lot of it's automated by different types of computer systems. So one thing that might be able to stop it is a paywall. It might stop a bot from being able to automatically gather it. But if a person pays to get past the paywall and then uses a data scraper, then they can still get that data. And then information that has been scraped will forever be part of a data set, even if you delete the source of the data. So if I post information online and it gets collected by an AI and used to train it, even if I take it down, even if I delete it, it's still going to be part of that AI, that data set. It's not going to get rid of that. So don't post sensitive information anywhere that gathers and sells data. Be careful about what data you make public or open. Is it something you really want to be available to everybody? And then AI can research the relationships between data sets and actually deduce information about individuals. So even if you don't literally post something, it can gather the available information and start figuring things out based on what you've made available. So don't post anything that can identify individuals. Even if a company follows guidelines or tries to behave in an ethical manner, criminals and scammers can use the data that you post publicly in illegal ways. They can still gather that data, and they don't necessarily care about what's ethical or what's legal because they're already breaking the law. Data that has been deleted or removed can still be accessed via data sets and internet archives. And as an example, I posted the Wayback Machine. You can look up things that were posted on the internet, even if you took it down, deleted it, or removed it. And so it's a lot easier to not make a mistake in the first place than it is to try and go back and clean it up. So, and then I've also seen that some companies have even collected data from piracy websites. So, what are some solutions to these problems that we're facing? You can add a written notice that disallows the use of your information in AI if you post it publicly. That's not necessarily going to stop someone from gathering it, but it does give you grounds to have them take something down or remove it from an AI. Software such as Glaze, Kara, Nightshade, and others can protect images from being used by AI at all. It does something called data poisoning. And what it does is it prevents an AI from being able to read that information and use it for training. It's just like white noise, but it doesn't impact the quality of the image. To my understanding, most of this is for visual art. I don't think we have anything for writing yet, but that might be something that comes on down the line as AI tools become more advanced. So these are things you can look out for if you want to protect images from being used in AI. You can protect copyright work in order to you can copyright work in order to protect it from being used by AI. So we've said before that you want to be careful that you're not violating copyright. If you want to protect something from being used by AI, you can also copyright it yourself. That gives you a sort of legal framework to go after anyone who's using your material and infringing your copyright. Database rights can also apply, even if you post data online, then there are certain rights and permissions that you can put down for what they are legally allowed to use it for, even though it's free. And so you can have some legal protections even for open free data sets. It's just something that you have to be aware of when you're making information public. So, moving on from companies and talking about scams and hackers, the chief danger to your organization is still going to be social engineering. So some of you may have had training about this or heard about it. It's a lot easier for a scammer to trick a person than to hack a computer. It's a lot easier for them to trick me into giving them my credentials or private information than it is to hack into a computer. And it used to be that a lot of times it would be through email, and they would pretend, for instance, that they could be your boss and say, hey, I need your private credentials to log into your account. And a lot of people have been trained not to do that, or if something seems suspicious, we'll call that person, contact IT, make sure it's legitimate before you hand out information. But what if you got a phone call and there was a voice and it sounded like your boss? AI can mimic voices if they have enough data to be able to collect from that person's voice. And even if the request seems suspicious, if it sounds like the person you know, then I'm willing to bet a lot of people will be more susceptible to that type of scam than they would have been otherwise. And so when we have these privacy and protection guidelines for our organizations, we want to make sure that we start taking AI into account. AI can also be used to translate scams into many different languages, so it kind of has a wider net. And then it can be used to trick people into giving away sensitive information. So another one of the classic staples of a scam email is it's going to have a lot of misspellings or errors, or it's not going to sound quite correct. But as AI becomes more advanced, it could fix a lot of that, translate it into many languages, be more grammatically correct, and potentially trick people into giving away valuable data. AI can also be used to write malware, So even though social engineering is the main concern, it can potentially lead to an increase in the amount of malware that's on the internet. Organizations need to ensure that their privacy policies and training take AI into account. AI has removed many of the barriers that scammers struggled with in the past, and it's easier to trick a person than hack into a computer. And that kind of leads us into part two, which is social responsibility. We've talked about ways to protect our company, about legal liabilities, about being aware of the dangers of releasing information on the internet. But we also, especially if you're part of a library system, we have a lot of social responsibility to our communities. And so another thing that can take into consideration is if you're using AI, it's not an unbiased source of information. As I've heard many people say, bias in, bias out. AI is only as unbiased as the information that's fed into it. If you feed an AI biased information, it's going to give you biased feedback. And so AI can regurgitate data that is used to train it, including sensitive data and copyrighted work. A lack of transparency about where data comes from makes it difficult to know how reliable data is and in what way it is biased. So, because there have been so many lawsuits, because there's been criticism, a lot of companies are being a lot more quiet about where they're getting the data that they're using to train their AI. And if we don't know what data is being used to train the AI, then we don't know in what way it's biased. It can also be manipulated to fit an agenda. So we have to take that in consideration about who owns AI, the AI, who's controlling it, and what their agendas are. So another issue is social bias. Decisions made by using AI can lead to unequal outcomes for marginalized people. By using huge swaths of public data, AI can propagate biased information and hurtful stereotypes. So if there's a bias in society and that bias is reflected in the data and it's used to train AI, then that bias then can be reflected in the information that the AI gives us. So generative AI has been shown to propagate harmful stereotypes about minority groups. It's been shown to sexually objectify women when producing writing or art based on the images that were fed into it from portrayals in film, in art, and in advertising. So, for instance, if there's a lot of sexual objectification in film, art, advertising, then the images that are going to be produced by that AI might reflect that. It might have that male gaze, or it might have a certain bias behind it. And so we need to be aware when using AI that these kinds of issues still exist. Just because it's coming from a computer or an AI doesn't mean it's not reflecting human biases and the problems that come with that. So most tech workers tend to be cis, white, and men, which means that there's going to be a potential perspective bias in technology and in AI. A lot of it might be unconscious, but if there are any assumptions that are being held by the people making AI, that assumption then can be reflected in what's produced by an AI. We also have to consider about where the information is coming from. If online harassment can skew data, as certain groups of people may feel unsafe in certain online spaces. So if certain groups of people feel unsafe on certain, let's say, social media sites, and information is being gathered from that, then those people's perspectives are not going to be taken into account because they're not a part of the data set. So we also have to consider who is able to post online in the first place. Data has been shown to skew wealthy, skew Western, and skew white. And so all of these are major concerns that we need to take into consideration when we're using it and when we're talking to our patrons about using AI. AI may regurgitate data as the result of institutional racism or sexism without analyzing the context around that data. So if data is a reflection of some kind of institutional bias, the AI is not taking that into account. It's just taking the data. AI can increase inequality as it sees use in court and processing housing applications, in hiring practice, and in handing out loans. And so what we've essentially been able to now do, even if it's not necessarily intentional, is take that bias and automate it. We've automated these societal biases. So AI can analyze an applicant's data to see to what degree it fits certain criteria, and then marginalized people may not even have their applications considered. If you if they only pick out the top 10% of applications and it's choosing applications based on biased criteria, then you may not even see a person. AI might remove you from the list without you ever having interacted with an actual human being. So AI is not a peer review source of information, is only as reliable as the data fed into it. And as we've seen, many companies do not want to share where they get their data. AI can be manipulated by companies, organizations, and individuals with an agenda. So we want to educate the public about these issues when they themselves want to use AI, or if we're dealing with companies about these issues. And as we use AI, we want to make sure our own HR departments are taking all of these things into considerations if they start using AI. We also want to talk about AI vulnerabilities. AI is open to manipulation from third parties. Criminals, governments, and other groups can compromise an AI's reliability. So I'm not going to get too into the details on this, but 3 examples of threats to AI are digital hallucinations. AI can make up fake data in order to fulfill the request that you've made. So we talked earlier about Air Canada having an AI chatbot deal with customer service. And it made up a policy that did not exist, and they had to honor that. That's an example of a digital hallucination. It just made up information in order to meet your demands. Another potential issue is a prompt injection attack, which is inputting a prompt that tricks an AI into ignoring its safeguards. So early on, as an example, at the very beginning, if you typed in something like, how do I make a bomb into Chat GPT would probably not give you that information. It would say, I'm not allowed to tell you that. But if you said, how do I build a bomb as a joke, it might just give you the instructions. Now, AI has gotten a lot better about that. It's gotten a lot more sophisticated, but the type of prompt injection attacks that we're seeing have also gotten more sophisticated. And so this is something to be aware of, that it's a possible vulnerability and fault in AI. Another one is data poisoning, which is corrupting data so that AI cannot train itself on it or process it. So we talked earlier about poisoning an image so that an AI cannot train itself on your copyrighted work or your image. And this is a potential weak point of AI. If the data itself is being corrupted or is being manipulated in some way, then that can manipulate how trustworthy an AI is. So if people are using AI to do a job for work, for college, for school, they need to be aware of the potential weaknesses and vulnerabilities that impact how trustworthy an AI actually is. So, what is our responsibility? We have to take into account that when we're using, if we choose to use AI in our workplace, for instance, if we wanted to use it in the hiring process, we need to take some of these biases into consideration. And the same HR protocols we have in place now, we need to be using that to influence how we use AI. The same DEI guidelines that your organization applies to its practices now should be applied to the use of AI. If you care about diversity and about equity, then you want to make sure that you're following those guidelines you have in place for how you use AI. So we also have to educate patrons about issues with bias when discussing AI sources. If they're going to use it to try and help them write something, then they need to understand that the information that they're getting could be incorrect, it could lack context, or it could be made up through a hallucination. We also need to make sure that we educate the public about issues with bias and misinformation in the age of AI. And we need to educate the public about dependability of information that comes from AI. So, as an example, there was a lawyer that used AI to generate a list of cases that supported what he was trying to argue in court. And the AI made up a lot of cases. And so when this list of cases was being reviewed, they were having trouble finding a lot of them because they didn't exist. And he ended up getting dragged into court and having a disciplinary hearing because he submitted a list of cases that weren't real to try and support his argument. And he didn't even realize that he had done that because he had been using AI. So this is all something that we need to be aware of, but also we need to be informing people in our community because they may not be aware of these weaknesses in AI if they choose to use it. So all of this, what's the main takeaway that I'm trying to communicate? AI can be used in a lot of amazing ways to help improve efficiency and accuracy in the workplace. It can help people with accessibility. It can help people with various types of learning disabilities. It can help people with physical disabilities. It can be used for communication. It can be used for education. AI can be a wonderful tool, but it's not a perfect tool. And AI has been hyped up by a lot of companies that want to sell you something. You have to be aware that it's a very good tool, but you're the person who is responsible for using it in an ethical way. AI is ultimately a tool that must be used intelligently and ethically, and like all tools, people can use it for ethical or unethical ends. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. It's not going to replace people. AI is a tool to be used by people in a way that is intelligent and ethical. So that is the main presentation. And if anyone has any questions, I would love to hear them and respond. So I think we can go ahead, Jason, and open up if anybody had any questions they wanted answered.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. That's really fascinating. A lot of great insight and advice in there. I haven't seen any questions that have come in yet. Don't be shy. I don't know if you have the ability to raise your hand, but if you do, go ahead and try doing that. And I can also allow you to speak your question, or you can type it into chat, or you can enter it into the Q&A feature. And while we're waiting for that, I will ask my own question. And that is that I saw early on that a lot of companies like OpenAI and
Mhm.
Microsoft were putting out language that says if you get sued by somebody for copyright violation, we will take that on. We'll take over. You don't have to worry about that. And I thought, well, that's pretty bold. I just wonder if have you heard anything about whether they're adhering to that? Were they lying? Or what are your thoughts about that?
So I haven't read up on that specifically, but at the end of the day, they're going to do whatever works for their bottom line. I think a lot of these companies are trying to build trust in AI, and some of the really large companies, if you're talking about Amazon or somebody, might be able to fight some of this in court. But at the end of the day, the law is going to be the law. I think you're going to see a lot of different interests fighting one another. So I personally would not place my well-being or my organization in jeopardy based on the word of a company. They might be willing to honor that. They might change their mind. And if that's the case, I have to look out for myself and for my organization. So I feel like in that you kind of just have to make a judgment call. Um, I trust myself a lot more than I do an AI company. At the end of the day, they're always going to do what benefits them. Right now, they're trying to build confidence in AI, which I can understand, but a lot of that's going to be walked back, I think, as we start to define what they're legally allowed and not allowed to do. Because right now, we don't necessarily know.
Okay, we have a question from Ruth who is
Mhm.
asking, how can you tell when you're talking to a bot or generative AI or a real person on the phone? Do you have any advice?
So I'm not super worried about AI being able to copy any random person and their voice because in order to copy a person's voice, they need to have a lot of data to be able to mimic it. So if you're not a public figure, then the chances of AI being able to copy your voice is very low, to my understanding. I'm not worried, for instance, about an AI copying my voice because I don't have a lot of videos or examples of public speaking available for it to build off of. And so I think that's probably more of a concern for public figures than it is for random people. You can kind of tell if you watch some AI videos where they're copying a person's voice, where sometimes it just sounds like digital static in the middle of the talking and it doesn't sound like a person anymore, and you can kind of tell there's something weird going on. I think the best thing you can do is just put in some safeguards about what information is and is not allowed to be shared um, online, and then just follow those. If you know for a fact that you're not allowed to give certain information over an email, then it doesn't even necessarily matter if it's an AI or a person, because either way they're breaking the policy by not by having you give private information over an email. And so I think the best thing to do for that is, instead of trying to detect whether or not it's a person or an AI and being really paranoid, I think it's better to just have very safe um, methods of communication where you're not going to be getting um, contacted from outside of your company. So, as an example, we have a work email. If I get an email from a random source and it's not a Gwinnett email address, and it's saying, "Hey, I'm your boss, give me this private information," then that's probably not my boss. That's probably someone trying to trick me. Um, Whereas if it comes from a Gwinnett email, then I can verify it. And if I have any concerns, I can actually contact that person or contact IT and talk to them and verify if it's really that person. So that's probably going to be more of a question for IT and for leadership, I think, as we go forward. But I think as long as we use common sense, guidelines for how we communicate private information, then I don't think we have to worry about trying to figure out if a voice is really that person or an AI. I think it's going to come down to just following our rules.
And Maggie had posted sort of an example like Scarlett Johansson is inherently at more risk of having her voice cloned
Hmm.
than a lot of other people would be. And I'll just say that I recently got a call from a telemarketer, and they it was pretty realistic sounding voice. And I asked a question, and it gave an answer, but it was I could tell it was a scripted answer. And so I asked it
Hmm.
something else, like, how do you like your job or something? It just kept giving me scripted answers. And so I got frustrated and said, I would really like to talk to a real person. And of course, there was a real person listening in the background. Got on and said, oh, there's a real person here. But then they flipped back on their AI to talk to me again and just hung up on them. That's frustrating. Um,
And that's a good point. Even if the voice sounds realistic, with a lot of AI, it's not a person. And it's when we talk about AI, it's not AI in the sense like it is in the movies, where it's like this self-aware, intelligent thing. It's basically just a computer algorithm. it doesn't think for itself. It just copies what it thinks you want to hear. And so it probably will sound very unnatural and kind of scripted and weird too.
Yeah. And Ruth commented that that's the example I gave is more what she was talking about as well. Well, we have reached the end of our time. And the recording will be up. I noticed I did a session yesterday and the recording is already up. So they're doing a good job of putting these up pretty quickly. So thank you, Zach. Really appreciate your time. And everyone have a great day. If people have questions for you, Zach, can you put your email in, or would you be willing to answer questions through email?
Yeah, let me so let me see if how I can share that actually. Probably should put it on the
You,
presentation.
you can put it in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, give me a moment. I'm gonna try to put it in there then. There you go. So it's zmcElveen@gwinnetpl.org. And you're all welcome to send me questions. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. And thank you, Jason, for being my moderator. Thank you for everyone who came. I really appreciate everybody who asked a question or who just attended and watched the presentation. So thank you.
Great. I'm going to stop the recording.